Thanks very much, everyone. I think we might start. And can I, on behalf of the Melbourne Conservatorium of Music, just welcome everyone and also all my distinguished colleagues and friends here in the auditorium. You were going to be in Melbourne Hall, but we've sort of not double booked, we've like triple booked. We've got a Wagner conference with some international guests coming, and we had to actually change the schedule to adjust to some of the flights and some of the other strategic things that we had. We've also got a lot of masters recitals, and we have to sort of put those when we can actually get the examiners. So we're juggling all the time around this time of the year. But I actually thought it would be better to come into this little lecture room because it's more intimate. I think it'll be better for us to have a good discussion and a dialogue, and we can keep you up the front so you can be fully engaged. So again, just on behalf of the Conservatorium and the University, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Can I just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, both past and present, and I pay my respects to their elders. Today, I'm going to speak just for a few minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Anne Liers, and she can introduce everyone. But I think most people in this room know that I am a music educator. I was teaching at the University of New South Wales for many years. I was in charge of the music education program there. I went up to the Hong Kong Institute of Education and then the United States, and I worked over there in music education, particularly grad music education. I have a large Australian Research Council grant running right now. We've got about $400,000 over 5 years to do a big study, and we've been working with children in Victorian schools. We've surveyed and worked with about 3.5 children so far in primary and secondary schools, and we've worked with about another, I think it's about 8 or 10 schools specifically, with intensive discussions with the kids, sort of mapping their progress over time. In fact, in one site we've been looking at them for more than a year. It'll probably be about 18 months of a sort of developmental pattern for how they're going in music education and what their perspective is on music education. I've also done a lot of advocacy around the world because I was president of the International and Australian Societies for Music Education. And I think today we really have a bit of work to do as a profession. I'm 59. I trained at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music in music education back in the 70s, and what I had in terms of my training was just really phenomenal. I had an hour and a half of trumpet and piano lessons each week, 1-to-1. I had music education methodology classes for 3 hours a week, every week of the 4 years that I was there. And I, like many of you who trained in the 70s and 80s, you had a really great training and some incredible opportunities that have stuck with you and made you a great music educator. I really fear for music education in tertiary institutions, and I don't say that disparagingly against any of our colleges of education or even my conservatorium where we do train performance teachers. I just think we've really got to have a close look about the number of music teachers that we're training. We need more. We're training, I think, probably about half the numbers from the early 90s, and that's not good enough because we're finding that many schools can't find teachers, and therefore the music program just closes. So I fear, in one sense, for music education, but I'm really thrilled every time I go out to schools and see where it really is happening, and it's happening in many of your schools, that it's probably as good as it's ever been. So we've got a lot to celebrate, but we've also got a lot of things that we really need to come to grips with. And so this Victorian government inquiry was incredibly important. I know they listened to us very, very carefully, but I'm fearful that the rhetoric is there and the action may not happen. And I've seen that so many times in my life as a music educator. I've seen it overseas, I've seen it in this country many, many times. And so we really do have to persist and persevere to get our voice across to those that hopefully will listen. One of the things I've learned in my career is that we need to learn to speak to others in ways that they understand. We need to find good, solid arguments about why every child should be exposed to a music education, and there should be quality experiences. I've just published an article in Psychology of Music because I did a 14-year longitudinal study with children at 8 different schools in Sydney, and the kids have actually left high school and university now. They're all sort of about 23, 24. This started in the late 90s. And we found huge differences between the quality of the experience in some schools and other schools, and that was one of the most important predictors of engagement, continuing success, and sort of enrichment in terms of the children's education. So it was about the quality of the program in the schools, and that usually came down to whether the school acknowledged that program as being important, it was part of their mission, and they saw music as really important in the school's life, and they gave the kids the opportunities that they deserved so that they could really flower. We're in the Brain Institute here, and there's about 380 researchers in neuroscience and brain and all sorts of medical research. Some of the best research in this country happens in this building. It's actually important that we note that there is no gene for music. We are all born with musical abilities. And I really do think that it's incredibly important that we teach kids to think in sound as well as think in words and think in numbers. Music is absolutely unique because it's temporal. It unfolds over time. It's not instantaneous. It can be creative, it can be skill-based, it can be aesthetic, it can be many, many other things. And because of the multi-dimensional nature of musical engagement and musical experience, it is one of the richest and most meaningful learning experiences that a child can have. And we know that from the research. There's stacks of research. We don't have to sort of prove that music makes a kid smarter in other subjects, because perhaps it does, I don't know. I think the jury's actually still out on that. I did a study in 8 different countries with 25,000 students, and what we found that kids who are learning music are more motivated to study at schools and more motivated to study their academic subjects. So not only is music a powerful and important means for a child to develop holistically, but it has positive spin-offs for everything else that they do in their lives and beyond school. And I can show you stacks of research that says that. I mean, we've got mountains of this stuff now. What we've got to do is try and convince those who are in other disciplines who haven't heard this before to actually sit down and listen, because it really is important that they do that. I fear, unfortunately, that sort of in Victorian schools, we're not really going forward in music education like we should be. Our children in Victorian schools, and in fact Australian schools, deserve a lot more. And so I think it's up to us to sort of really try and get an agenda today that can help us provide a roadmap of action in the coming months and years to sort of turn this sort of trend around. We've got some amazing people today, and we've got some great people who have been working incredibly hard for many, many years in music education. I'd like to introduce Dr. Anne Liers. Now, Anne is the chair of sMAG, and I don't think there'd be a person in this room that doesn't know Anne. But as I sort of sign off for this part in the introductions, can I just say that she is really one of the jewels in music education crown in this country. She has not only been an exemplary teacher at one of our public schools for many, many decades, but she's been the person who drives these sorts of forums, sort of sends out the emails relentlessly. She's done a PhD in this area. She is passionate in a way that we need to find more of us being passionate in that same way. So please enjoy her passion, but also can I just thank her for everything that she's done for music education throughout her career.
Well, thank you very much. Very generous of you. Welcome to Mrs. Jan Kronberg, MLC Chair of the Parliamentary Committee. Thank you for coming. Mr. Colin Brooks, MP Deputy Chair of the Parliamentary Committee. Helen Champion from VCAA. Of course, Gary McPherson, our host today, who went to great trouble to get us this venue when things went a bit wrong at the Melba Hall. We appreciate that effort. Thank you very, very much. Professor Brian Caldwell, has he arrived yet? Okay. Partners, Kevin Kelly from the Association of Music Educators, Carl Stevens from Australian Council of Educators and Music Matters, principals, university leaders, teachers and members of the music community. I welcome you here this afternoon for this most important forum on the future of music education in Victorian schools. And I thank you for your support by being here today. I'd like to start by introducing my colleagues who will be presenting this forum, and I would also like this opportunity to thank them sincerely for their incredible support for music education and for their most valued contribution to AMUs. Would you stand up, please, Associate Professor Robin Stevens? Thank you. Principal Fellow of the Conservatorium of Music. Principal Ray Yates, Monbulk High School. Kevin, Primary Schools. Kevin Kelly, Executive Director of AMUs, who you've met at the door. Carl Williams, the Instrumental Coordinator, Music Coordinator from the DWCD, thank you. Catherine Lyons, the Coordinator of Music at Camberwell South Primary School. And Ian Harvey, Music Council of Australia and Music Futures. Thank you very much. So these people will be on the panel in the second half of this program, and you'll be able to ask them questions. We are here today to accept and respond to the report from the Parliamentary Education and Training Committee's inquiry into the extent, benefits and potential of music education in Victorian schools, presented to Parliament in November 2013. Now, those of you who have had a chance to read this report will, I am sure, join with me in expressing appreciation to the committee for their serious engagement with the issues brought to them, for their comprehensive evaluation of the issues, and for this excellent report, which historically will serve as a report on the state of music education in schools in Victoria at this point of time. Would you join me in showing your appreciation for their work? I'd like to also show appreciation to members of the Department of Early Childhood Development, of Education and Early Childhood Development, and the Victorian Curriculum Assessment Authority for taking our concerns seriously enough to initiate this parliamentary inquiry. We are here this afternoon to ensure that this report will not find its way onto a shelf in a library as other past reports have done. Indeed, we've had major reports every decade since Graham Bartle's report titled Music in Education Schools was commissioned in 1968. The latest report, of course, is the National Review into School Music Education in 2005, which many of you here today contributed to. So why is this report so important, and why do we believe music education should be part of the core curriculum for every child? Now, there is a substantial body of national and international research that supports the inclusion of music as a core subject in the curriculum, and much of this has been recognised in the report. Arguments are both intrinsic and extrinsic. Now, we need these findings to relate to powerful policy recommendations, and that's what we'll be looking for in our report and in the implementation of the report. Allow me to share with you just 3 arguments relating to the importance of music education. The first one, of course, from Plato. Music is a moral law. It gives soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and charm and gaiety to life and everything. Plato, of course, proposed a system of public education consisting of gymnastics for the discipline of the body and music for the discipline of the mind. The next is a quotation from Bruce May, who's did a research study into music education in Queensland. His conclusions were, an effective music education is of intrinsic value to a person's well-being and richness of life. Study of music enables us to experience all that is human as it inspires, turns on our senses and emotions, opens our minds, and reaches into our inner selves. Music study also enhances self-esteem, builds self-confidence and self-discipline, and encourages respect from others. It also enhances the quality of life. To participate fully in one's culture, a child should develop the musical knowledge and skills that are inherent in a quality music education. The most contemporary philosophy is offered by our esteemed Ambassador Richard Gill, who writes, and I think this found its way into the report as well. We teach music because it is unique and good. We teach music so our children can make their own music. We teach music because it acts. We teach music because it acts in a unique way on the heart, mind, soul, and spirit of the child, stimulating thought and imagination in a very special way. So we need to ask ourselves why we continue to deprive most of our children of a music education and why it is sidelined in our curriculum. It is not a frill, but an essential element in the total development of the child. Now, before I hand over to Robin Stevens to introduce our guest speaker, may I first take 2 minutes to give you a brief overview of the work of the advocacy group, the School Music Action Group. The formation of sMAG was a Victorian response to the enormous concern for the state of music education in Victorian schools and the need to implement the recommendations from the National Review of School Music Education, 2005, in the Victorian context. It was formed following the 2007 Victorian workshop, which was hosted by Principal Jeremy Ludovic from Melbourne High School. It was titled School Music Education for Every Child, Promoting a World-Class Music Education in Victoria. Key speakers included Senator the Honourable Rod Kemp, the Honourable Phil Davis, MP, and Dr. Richard Gill, who gave the keynote address. Proceedings and the recommendations are documented in the Victorian workshop report, which can be accessed on our sMAG blog. sMAG brings together representatives of the key music education community, including teachers and principals, as well as representatives from the tertiary music and education sectors, music arts bodies, and the music industry. Purpose of sMAG is to unify the music education sector and its stakeholders, and its mission is to work cooperatively with the state and federal governments to ensure that the recommendations of the National Review of School Music Education are adopted and implemented through the state of Victoria. Our mission is that every child in Victorian schools participates in a quality music education that is taught by professionally trained music teachers. What we have done: we've published this music workshop report, which contains recommendations for actions for the government and for the music sector. Held 2 open forums on the Australian curriculum to respond to the CARA's shape paper and the draft of the Australian curriculum for the arts. Worked closely with Dick Letts from the Music Council of Australia, contributing to the development of educational music policy and advocacy. Developed partnerships and consulted with the music community. Developed advocacy statements and a collection of relevant research supporting music education in schools. Developed a strategic plan for the effective delivery of music education in Victorian schools. Initiated 7 meetings with the DWCDT and including the Minister for Education and with the staff at VCAA. As you will see, we are honoured to have the Chair of the Parliamentary Committee, Ms Jan Kronberg, address you today. This will be followed by Professor Brian Caldwell, who will respond to the report before you will have an opportunity to speak in the open forum. What happens after the forum? We are inviting you to fill out your comments on that comment sheet that you have, and along with the recordings we are making of the proceedings today, we'll be using these to assist in the development of response, which we will forward to the Parliament and for the DWCD and also the VCAA. We will be having a meeting to develop this draft, and then we'll be inviting anybody here who would be interested in forwarding our what we're doing to a meeting in the second week of February, date yet to be determined, where we will appoint a new executive committee, consider the draft response to the report, raise any salient issues, and commence the development of an action plan for the implementation of the report. We welcome anyone who'd be interested to attend, and as I said, we'll have details on the sMAG blog and Facebook of when the dates come out, and I will contact anyone who lets me know they are interested. Now, it is my very great pleasure to introduce the Chair of the Parliamentary Committee, Mrs Jan Kronberg, who kindly accepted our invitation to address you at this forum. Jan Kronberg, MLC, is the Liberal member for Eastern Metropolitan region. She's a former marketing lecturer at Box Hill Institute and is experienced in business management and education. Would you please welcome Dan Kronberg?
Well, Dr. Lears, thank you very much for those kind words of introduction. And what I'd like to do is to let you know that I'm here feeling a sense of great joy to be with you here today. And on a very personal note, what I'd like to say is that I actually studied at the Melbourne College of Advanced Education on this very campus many, many years ago. And my majors during my time as a student in secondary education were drama and English. So many aspects of music education have particular resonance with me through that training. I can also share this, that the building next door was a place where I would go as a very nervous primary school student when I was learning pianoforte. And I used to have to go for examinations in the building next door. So in one way, my sense of childhood terror has been alleviated by having my presentation here today. I have to say that I am by no means an accomplished musician. I did what I was told, and I think I derived benefit from it, but I'd never ever applied myself as I should have by dint of practice that it required. Of course, what I'd like to do is share with you the report in my capacity as the incoming chair of the Parliament of Victoria's Education and Training Committee. And before I do that, of course, acknowledging the chair of sMAG, Dr. Anne Liers, and other members of the committee who actually attended hearings, Robin Stevens, Jenny Heinrich, whose work has been extensively quoted, Deborah Smith, Kevin Kelly, Carl Stevens, and Professor Brian Caldwell, I think I should be acknowledging, Catherine Lyons, and of course Professor Gary McPherson, who are with us here today. Now, we actually have the nature of the reference before you, an inquiry into the extent, benefits and potential of music education in Victorian schools. And as Dr. Les mentioned earlier, it was tabled just last month in the Parliament of Victoria. And of course, that reference included addressing issues such as evidence supporting music education in schools, current provision of music education in Victoria, future optimum provision of music education in Victorian schools. Now, before I move into that particular area, because Dr. Liers shared with us that wonderful quote from Plato, what I'd like to read into proceedings today, because I've actually got a copy of the transcript of the 27th of March when the sMAG committee met with the Parliamentary Committee, and it's actually the transcript, and there's a wonderful piece that sums up the reason why we're all here today and how important music education is. And I quote verbatim, "Research shows the educational benefits to the development of the whole child in the personal, social and intellectual domain, as well as in the acquisition of language, literacy, numeracy, creativity, social skills, concentration, teamwork, fine motor coordination, self-confidence and emotional sensitivity." The research also shows that learning an instrument further benefits the gains from a class-based music program and therefore should be an essential part of every school curriculum, unquote, Dr. Leas. And thank you very much to everybody for the rich nature of their contribution to the inquiry. Now, just tracking through some of the slides that we have here today, I'll expand on some of the points, but I think you're probably particularly keen to hear about the findings and the recommendations. If we look at the current provision of education in Victoria, clearly we had to focus on specific funding for music education, non-specific funding such as general student resource package funding, parent contribution, and the extent and quality of music education. If we could have the next slide. Future optimum provision of music education in Victorian schools, addressing the issues of optimum governance and oversight arrangements, optimum use for targeted funding, optimum balance of central mandates and supports, and optimum balance funding. Now, the inquiry attracted a significant amount of interest, and the inquiry, the committee, actually benefited from the rich harvest of 244 submissions. I've been told that that's the largest number of submissions ever received by the Education Training Committee in the Parliament of Victoria. The committee, in their erstwhile efforts, conducted 9 days of public hearings and 2 forums. And the committee actually went out to public hearings in Mildura, and they had site visits in 3 schools. Now, I think it's really important at this point to let you know that I assumed the role as the chair of the committee at the end of June this year, and therefore I wasn't privileged to sit through the hearing process. So it's been a delight of mine to meet people who have come along and make the contribution as they have. And of course we all appreciate this, and in a way I realise many of the points that the report is making echo your pleadings, your heartfelt desires for what music education is, and part of your cogent argument. And all of that is so welcome. And so we all understand that music's an integral part of society that we live in, and music education ensures that music can flourish within our society. Unfortunately, there have been few improvements to music education in the past 2 decades. And there's limited opportunities for just seeing what the scope of music education in Victoria is, and the committee did rely on the research for the master's program of Jenny Heinrich. And of course, and this is the painful part, that there is a significant variation in the quality of music programs between schools, and a really stark contrast between schools that suffer from disadvantage and students in rural and regional Victoria, and students from financially disadvantaged backgrounds clearly face greater challenges in terms of being able to access a music education, and this is the imperative that the music education is provided in the school setting. It was also identified too that clearly Indigenous students and gifted and talented students and students with disabilities clearly have their own unique learning needs with respect to music education. One aspect of the emphasis has been the notion of supporting Victorian teachers I'm going to use this language, in a more robust and sensitive manner. And take notice of some of the problems that music teachers experience. We can see that, particularly in rural and regional areas, some of the input that's actually quoted in the report talks about the profound sense of professional isolation for music teachers in rural and regional settings. And so we've looked to that, and there's a reason to be optimistic to redress that problem. Clearly, there's a lot of, and the report reflects this, that there was strong support amongst contributors to this inquiry for music to be taught by specialist teachers at the primary level. And this is where the fault line occurs. This is the tectonic action where I think, as a cohort of people interested in music education and people who have provided excellence in that area over decades, and we're probably not too much of a stretch to say, we've got world-class contributors to the debate and the forum here today, that the importance of music education being taught from foundation year right through. And whilst there is an accommodation for that, the actual delivery of that is not apparent, and it is not universal. Primary classroom teachers have an important role in delivering music education, but of course, and you all know this, but many of them not only lack the skills and training and the opportunity to acquire the skills through training. So it's an issue of opportunity, probably not an issue of interest and drive. But some of the other areas centre around the teacher's confidence in being able to teach in this area. We identified too that current primary pre-service teaching training courses do not adequately equip teachers to teach music. If we could have a look at the point now, and thank you very much, Carl, for keeping up with me as you are, strengthening instrumental music in Victorian schools. We acknowledge that many government schools, perhaps most secondary schools in Victoria, do offer optional instrumental music. And we know that there are the schools that we've actually called the lighthouse schools, that some have built a strong instrumental music program and they receive a greater proportion of the funding. And then we come to the debate about the base schools and the allocation of resources from them to be the centre from which other music teaching staff are actually deployed from the base school. And we know that this provides amongst those schools, the schools such as University High, McKinnon High, Baldwin High and Blackburn High, and not to forget Eltham High School, that those schools do excel in those programs and have a regional drawing power, and we know many people seek to move in and actually distort real estate property values in terms of being in the catchment for schools that have fine music programs. Baldwin High being a pretty acute example of that. So there's the drive, there's the interest, there's the passion. Secondary schools without an instrumental music program can find it difficult to grow a program from scratch under the current system, and in our recommendations we have addressed that. Many stakeholders are concerned about the impact of changes to how music teachers' positions are classified in schools. Now, just in terms of the recommendations and the 45 findings, I just want to introduce Colin Brooks, my parliamentary colleague, who is the Deputy Chair of the committee, and he and I have assumed the role as Chair and Deputy Chair in June together, and we were very fortunate in two former members of the committee who brought forward the wisdom behind these recommendations and did a lot of the grunt and provided the rich harvest that this report is a synthesis of. So we too have benefited greatly from their efforts. We do endorse these recommendations, but we can't claim to have sat through all the hearings that form the culmination as we see them. Now, the committee made 17 recommendations, and they covered generic things such as strategic directions, supporting teachers, and strengthening instrumental music. And they included the collection of annual data about collecting music education, the creation of a network of lighthouse secondary schools across the state, ensuring that government schools have adequate facilities and equipment, the development of a strategy on music education in Victoria, the development of a guide to support schools, the development of postgraduate music education courses, and an optional music education course for pre-service primary school teachers, the development of an appropriate teaching qualification for instrumental music teachers, development of a support network of music educators and supports the provision of targeted music professional learning opportunities, the establishment of startup grants program to support secondary schools without an instrumental music program to start a program. Now, before we move on to the conclusions, what I want to do is actually amplify for you the recommendations, because the recommendations have been summarised thus, as you've seen in this presentation, for ease of read. But I'm happy to respond during any questioning in a greater detail sense, but I just want to amplify the recommendations. There are 17. If you could bear with me, I'm going to do that now. The first recommendation, collecting data on music education provision, that the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development collects annual data about music education provision within Victorian government schools, both primary and secondary. Recommendation 2, building a network of lighthouse secondary schools with a strong focus on music education. That the Victorian Government builds upon existing secondary schools with strong music programs to create a network of lighthouse secondary schools across the state which are able to deliver, and these are the key words, aren't they, sequential and in-depth classroom instrumental music programs. It gives me great joy to be able to say that, I must say. Ensuring schools have adequate music facilities and equipment. That the Victorian Government ensures that government schools have adequate music facilities and equipment to support music education. Recommendation 4, developing a new Victorian strategy for school music education. That the Victorian Government, in consultation with music organisations, students, teachers, schools, and other relevant stakeholders, develops and implements a strategy on school music education in Victoria. I hope that resonates. Developing a promotion plan for music education. This is so basic that the Victorian Government develops a promotion plan to communicate the importance and benefits of a sequential and in-depth music education to school leaders and teachers. This needs to resonate. There needs to be, and this auditorium is filled with all of the champions of this cause in terms of promoting the importance of music education to the people who have been distracted by all of the other heavy lifting they've had to do as educators and school principals and volunteers sitting on school councils. So it's a question of getting their attention and putting that cogent argument to them in terms of providing the balance. Developing a music education guide for schools, that the Victorian Government develops a guide to support schools to deliver a sequential and in-depth music education from foundation to year 10, supporting Victorian teachers to deliver music education. Recommendation 7, developing further education opportunities for primary classroom teachers to specialise in music education. That the Victorian Government works with universities to develop a postgraduate course for in-service primary classroom teachers to specialise in music education. Recommendation 8, developing an optimal course in music education for pre-service primary classroom teachers. That the Victorian Government works with universities to develop an optional music education course for pre-service primary classroom teachers and puts in place measures to attract students to the course. Recommendation 9, delivering ongoing support and professional learning to primary classroom teachers. That the Victorian Government develops a support network of music educators that delivers in-school professional learning and support to primary classroom teachers. And this is particularly important for teachers in rural and regional settings and can be supported by collaborative technologies. So that is a promising direction. Recommendation 10, sharing, teaching, the curriculum resources in primary schools. That the Victorian Government supports primary schools to work in clusters to share teaching and curriculum resources with respect to music education. Recommendation 11, targeting music professional learning opportunities to graduate primary classroom teachers. That the Victorian Government supports the provision of targeted music professional learning opportunities for graduate primary classroom teachers and supports them to attend. This is critical, particularly for, again, in outer metropolitan settings. This is something that certainly resonated with the committee in how difficult it is, the lack of opportunity, and so again, just pointing to opportunities to have the collaborative learning exercises remotely through technology fora. That the Victorian Government supports the provision of increased music professional learning opportunities for primary classroom teachers and specialist music teachers in rural and regional Victoria and supports teachers to attend. Strengthening instrumental music in Victorian schools, recommendation 13, supporting schools to establish an instrumental music program. That the Victorian Government establishes a startup grants program to support secondary schools without an instrumental music program to start a program. Recommendation 14, developing criteria to allocate instrumental music program funding. That the Victorian Government develops a set of criteria for the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development regions to use when allocating instrumental music program funding. Recommendation 15, and there are only 3 more to go, developing an appropriate teaching qualification for instrumental music teachers. Now, this one, of course, is a point of tension, and there were lots and lots of inputs there, and people were quite polarised over this issue. The Victorian Government works with universities to develop an appropriate teaching qualification for instrumental music teachers, and the committee was also sympathetic of how best to have the professional standing for musicians who are not necessarily possessing formal teaching qualifications, but do come in from the world of music and work on a contract or part-time basis, and how they can be, their skills can be further enhanced. So this is certainly a contentious point. Recommendation 16, providing guidance on the operation of the Permission to Teach policy of 2011, that the Victorian Institute of Teaching develops a guide for schools on how the Permission to Teach policy applies to instrumental music teachers. So that underpins the last point I made. Recommendation 17, reviewing the base school model for employing instrumental music teachers, that the Victorian Government reviews the base school model for employing instrumental music teachers and puts in place measures to assist base schools to better manage the employment of instrumental music teachers across multiple schools. The base school does accommodate all of the administrative and human resources and work cover issues for the and it is funded but it does get into areas, problematic areas, where that base school then has to accommodate a teacher who comes back to that base school after having been deployed if the funding dries up on the school, the outreach school that they have been deployed to from radiating out from that base school. So that certainly needs to be looked at. Now, they're the 17 recommendations, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm happy to go through the findings with you. There are 45 of them. It's probably a bit tedious just at this point, but what I would like to do is share with you what I felt was appropriate in my chairs forward when we tabled this report. I'd like to place this on the record here today. As a society, we value music for the richness and joy that it brings to our lives. Music plays an especially valuable role in the lives of children. Young children learn and play through music, and older children use music to carve out their identity and express feelings and emotions. School provides the opportunity for young people to receive a formal music education and participate in co-curricular activities such as music lessons, choirs and ensembles. A quality music education at school provides the basis for Victorians to make, play or appreciate music throughout life. And here we are in Melbourne, just having proudly delivered or delivering the ring cycle. So I think that's one of the peak achievements for Melbourne as a cultural destination. My last two paragraphs were this. There is much focus in educational circles on the need to lift student numeracy and literacy levels. Whilst this is important, vital, it would be unfortunate if we became too narrowly focused on these outcomes, that we sidelined the role of music in our schools. Indeed, this report demonstrates that music and the arts can play an important role in engaging students at school, as well as lifting student performance and overall well-being. Clearly, music education should be an integral part of every child's education, wherever and whenever possible. As a society, we will be all the richer for cultivating a love and understanding of music within the next generation. And with this in mind, I commend the committee's final report to the Victorian Parliament. I think in terms of the conclusions, I'll just amplify these points. Music plays an especially valuable role in the lives of children. Quality music education provides the basis for Victorians to make, play or appreciate music throughout life. The recommendations in the committee's report do provide a framework for ensuring that all Victorian students have the opportunity to experience a meaningful music education. The substantial input into the inquiries from those who provided the submissions and gave evidence was invaluable, and the interest shown in the inquiry is a clear indication that music education is a very important element in Victoria's educational future. I'll leave my comments at that point, and I think there might be an opportunity, Dr. Lears, for one or two questions. Is that right?
Look, I think we're going to be applying the time for the question just at this stage, Jan. On behalf of the forum participants here, I'd really like to thank you, Jan, very much indeed for your presentation, and also to Colin for attending. We, of course, are hoping very much for a bipartisan approach when the recommendations finally get to the Parliament, and we are very much hoping for, as Gary said, I think some major action being taken to ensure that we reinvigorate music education in the government school sector. We have a little presentation for you, Anne, being the festive season.
Oh dear.
Here we have a chocolate Christmas tree.
Oh, how divine. Thank you very much.
Would you please join me in that? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully during the the forum discussion later, there may be a chance, Jan, for you to react to some of the questions and comments that people make. All right, I'd now like to introduce Professor Brian Caldwell. Brian is currently the Managing Director and Principal Consultant at Educational Transformations Proprietary Limited here in Melbourne, and he is no stranger to this university either, being Emeritus Professor of Education. Brian has been a very strong friend and supporter to music education. Many of you, of course, will know his co-authored book with Tanya Vaughan, Transforming Education Through the Arts. And so I'd invite Brian now to give his presentation. Thank you very much.
Just need a little help getting this PowerPoint slide up. Yeah. It just says music for on there. Sorry to be a disruptive influence here, and for my late arrival, there was a fierce rainstorm between my office and this venue that brought traffic to a standstill. But I'm glad, Jan, that I heard your summary of the report, and that was important for me. So we'll just pause for a moment and get a couple of headline slides up there. We need a little break too, I guess. Is my co-author here, Tanya? Is Tanya here? Okay. Right. Well, that means I'll have to fend for myself.
Okay. Would you like to do this, Brian, or do you want me to click through? Here we go. It's on this one. Just use
that. Okay. Well, colleagues, I'll be frank. I'd prepared one response for this forum, but I'll have to be frank and say that I tore it up yesterday, and I prepared another one for a reason which I'll explain in a moment. The forum could not have been more timely because it comes less than 2 days after the release of the results of the 2012 PISA tests in 65 countries. And reading the headlines, to which I'll return, one would imagine that a crisis is upon us and that an even stronger regime of unrelenting high-stakes test and a further narrowing of the curriculum are required, and the arts in general and music in particular will be sidelined. And so the title of my remarks applies. Will we resist the temptation? Now, first, I must congratulate Jan Kronberg and her colleagues on the Education and Training Committee for their outstanding report. It's one of the most comprehensive of its kind that I've seen. Its review of the research was comprehensive, and its canvassing of the evidence, including the very large number of submissions, is as balanced as one could ever hope to read. And it was interesting to see that that's the largest number of submissions that this particular committee has ever received. Its recommendations are sweeping and realistic, and I endorse them all. And in the light of the headlines that I've read in the last few days and my reflections over the last 24 hours, actually, I think those recommendations are rather modest. And my reaction now is we'd better get on with it and add a few more, and I'll come to that. So I do ask myself the question, what value can I add at this point? It's not particularly appropriate that I refer to the evidence that I gave to the inquiry, because that would be privileging my status over others who are far more expert than I as far as music education is concerned. I can bring a broader policy perspective to today's proceedings because I've got no background at all in music education. I'm an avid consumer of the arts, but I've never, ever played a musical instrument. I was a teacher of mathematics and science. However, I did work with my colleague at Educational Transformations, Dr. Tanya Vaughan. She's now at the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership to conduct the landmark research that led to our book, Transforming Education Through the Arts. Tanya is one of Australia's foremost impact researchers. And I'll refer to some of our research findings a little later. But there have been some troubling headlines about education this week. And I will refer, of course, to the results of the 2012 PISA tests. And the most dramatic of those were in the Australian yesterday. And that's what I'm referring to. Students slump in world rankings. Billions fail to stop slide in schools. Billions of dollars that we've spent, and they've failed to stop the slide in school performance. Now, clearly I'm anticipating, and I'll return to what it would cost to put music education of world quality in every single school in the country. And again, anticipating what I'll say, it's far less than billions of dollars, and it will have far more impact than what we've spent so far with negligible impact. Now, it's true that we've dropped in the rankings. Other nations have overtaken us. But as one of the Canadian newspapers said, and they've suffered a bit of a drop, even though they're ahead of us, we ought to stop hyperventilating about this. We're still one of a relatively small number of nations which are, to use the jargon, high quality, high equity. We are. And despite the pessimists and the cynics, the strategies to lift our rankings and be even better in the quality equity mix are actually known knowns. What we must do is resist the temptation to spend even more billions on what we know has not worked. Now, to demonstrate this in the context of music education, I'd like to call on the assistance of an eminent international scholar. Diane Ravitch is Research Professor of Education at New York University and a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. From 1991, she was Assistant Secretary for Education and Counsellor to Secretary of Education Lamar Alexander in the administration of President George H.W. Bush. And President Clinton appointed her to the National Assessment Governing Board, which oversaw federal testing. And after previously supporting testing and extensive choice, including charter schools in the engagement of the philanthropic sector, she reversed her position and reversed her position on each of those. And her strongest criticism was levelled at the testing movement and, among other things, the way it narrowed the curriculum. The title of one chapter in her 2010 book, The Death and Life of the American School System, was Hijacked: How the Standards Movement Turned into the Testing Movement. And this is what she had to say. How did testing and accountability become the main levers of school reform? How did our elected officials become convinced that measurement and data would fix the schools? Somehow our nation got off the track in its efforts to improve education. What once was the standards movement was replaced by the accountability movement. At the heart of the problem, according to Ravitch, is the relationship between testing and the purposes of education. Not everything that matters, she said, can be quantified. And here are some interesting words. What is tested may ultimately be less important than what is untested, such as a student's ability to seek alternative explanations, to raise questions, to pursue knowledge on his own, and to think differently. If we do not treasure our individualists, we will lose the spirit of innovation, inquiry, imagination, and dissent that has contributed powerfully to the success of our society in many fields of endeavour. And significantly, she was writing back in 2010, Ravitch drew attention to the balanced curriculum in countries that should be providing the benchmarks for her country, as well, of course, as our own. And what she said was this: other nations that outrank us, she was referring to the United States, on international assessment of mathematics and science do not concentrate obsessively on those subjects in their classrooms. Nations such as Japan and Finland have developed excellent curricula that spell out what students are supposed to learn in a wide variety of subjects. Their schools teach the major fields of study, including the arts and foreign languages, because they believe this is the right education for their students. Not because they'll be tested. They do the right thing without rewards and sanctions. Their students excel in the tested subjects because they are well educated in many subjects that teach them to use language well and to wrestle with important ideas. And she went on. Now we're starting to focus here, or she is, on what we're here today to talk about. In the arts, we should agree that all children deserve the opportunity to learn to play a musical instrument, to sing, to engage in dramatic events, dance, paint, sculpt, and study the great works of artistic endeavour from other times and places. Through the arts, children learn discipline, focus, passion, and the sheer joy of creativity. We should make sure that these opportunities and the resources to support them are available to every student in every school. However, it is her most recent book, published just a few weeks ago, that we should take the lead. The book is called Reign of Error. It's an interesting title, Reign of Error. And it's in that book that she makes the most powerful argument and the most devastatingly relevant critique in considering what we should do with this report. She demolishes strategies along the lines of privatising public education, obsession with national testing programs, merit pay, laptop fads, charter schools, online learning, and handing control to parents. each of which has merit in some circumstances. She highlights the benefits of early learning, wraparound services, and strengthening the profession. All of this made good reading for me, but what brought me to the edge of my seat, literally, was a chapter entitled The Essentials of a Good Education. That chapter, in my view, ought to be reissued under the title The Essentials of a Good Policy in Education. I'll just pull out a few excerpts as they relate to the extent, benefits and potential of music education in Victorian schools and the headlines of the week. I got just 5 short ones. I'll read them. Some of this is the most powerful stuff I've read, the most powerful I've read in relation to enhancing equity in schools and closing the gap between students who are stuck and bored in schools that are underperforming and students who are in schools that are switched on and benefiting from rich programs in music education. So let me read these. Every school should have a full, balanced and rich curriculum including the arts, science, history, literature, civics, geography, foreign language, mathematics and physical education. Our policymakers today think that what matters most is getting high test scores in reading and mathematics. They don't show any regrets if a school spends inordinate amounts of time and money on test preparation materials. Now this is important, this one. We cannot provide equal educational opportunity if some children get access to a full and balanced curriculum while others get a heavy dose of basic skills. This is one instance where no research is needed. The fact of inequality is undeniable, self-evident and unjustifiable. This inequality of opportunity may damage the hearts and minds of the children who are shortchanged in ways that may never be undone. Or developing it further and explicitly in the case of arts education in general and music education in particular, all are enriched and enhanced by the arts. The arts are essential for everyone. Life is enhanced by the arts. No student should be denied the opportunity to participate in the arts or to learn about the arts here and in other cultures. All students should have the chance to sing, dance, draw and paint in schools. They should have the resources for video production and for chorus, band, orchestra and dramatics. The arts are a source of joy, a means of self-expression and group expression. To master a musical instrument or to participate in choral music requires self-discipline and practice. No one can do it for you. Every school should have the resources to enable students to express their individuality and to take pleasure in joyful communal activity. And finally, sadly, the growing obsession with data has shoved aside these important goals. That's pretty powerful stuff. Now, finally, in my response, I asked the question, in response to that headline, could music education help lead Australia's climb up the international league tables? I would like to seriously advance the proposition that placing specialist arts teachers, including specialist music teachers in all Australian schools, would that lead Australia's climb up the international league tables much faster than any of the current strategies and at far less cost than anything envisaged at this time? I have not seen arts or music mentioned in one media comment in recent days. Now, let me give you a glimpse of the evidence that would support that contention, which is drawn from transforming education through the arts. I'll read what's on the screen there, but there are some pretty key facts there. Our research team examined the performance of students in 10 schools in highly disadvantaged settings in Western Sydney. 3 schools offered the longer-term program of the Song Room over 12 to 18 months. Did I see Alison from the Song Room here? Yeah, so if you want to know all about this, Alison is here. 3 schools offered an initial short-term program of 6 months. In each instance, the program was conducted for grade 5 and 6 students for 1 hour on a single day once a week. But there was a control group of 4 schools who did not offer the Song Room program. Song Room program, a diverse program with specialist arts teachers, music, dance, visual arts. 3 groups of schools were a match set as far as socio-educational advantage is concerned. This study was a rare example of quasi-experimental research design in education. Don't very often have the chance to do this. Perfectly matched set of schools. But the findings were stunning, of national and international significance. It confirmed everything that we found in international research. But this is what we found, that the students who were engaged in the arts gained a whole year in NAPLAN scores compared to students who did not engage in the arts. And approximately half a year in science and technology compared to those students in the matching schools who did not offer programs in the arts. Now, let me just compare that with PISA results. You know, this is a stunning comparison. I didn't have time to look at PISA 2012, but we've got PISA 2009. PISA 2009 tells us that Australian 15-year-olds in reading are 6 months behind Hong Kong, 13 months behind Shanghai, and 3 months behind Singapore. With just a limited dose of the arts, grade 5 students gain a whole year in NAPLAN. Look at maths. Leave aside Shanghai. Just a limited dose of the arts, we can make up a year on Hong Kong and Singapore. We can make up the difference in Hong Kong and Singapore and almost as much in Shanghai. Now, all of this assumes that we've got specialist arts teachers in all schools who could benefit from having those specialist teachers. And that's going to take time, isn't it? It's going to take time. Incidentally, don't look at Shanghai and say, well, Shanghai's a special case. The eminent Chinese scholar, Yang Zhao, who was in Melbourne last week, tells us that Shanghai is not that special. It's not. He says out in the villages they've got nothing else to do except study hard, and his schools out in Chongqing, he says they're just as good as Shanghai anyway. Shanghai, though, was just picked out by China as one jurisdiction, so if they had all of China in there, they'd probably do the same anyway, and he knows what he's talking about. But you get my point. And we were looking at schools in some of the most disadvantaged communities in Australia. So, if we've invested all of these billions of dollars with little or no gain, except in very particular places in Australia, and we've largely started to sink in PISA, just imagine what we could do by investing not billions, but just hundreds of millions in programs in the arts, and especially with music education. I say especially in music education because I have yet to find a single study in any country in the world that does not show the benefits of music education. And I'm an independent researcher. I have no financial or professional stake in music education. As I indicated at the beginning, just imagine the impact it would have. So returning to the comment I made, you can understand why I endorse every single recommendation of this excellent report that has been delivered for the Parliament of Victoria of the committee, Jan, that you shared, and why I say that the conclusions are not only to be commended and supported, but are relatively modest. And the headlines of the last few days suggest that they should be taken further. And I will have the opportunity in the next couple of weeks to spend a little time with Minister Dixon, and I'm going to say to him, I'll actually give him the text of these remarks, I'm going to say, Minister Dixon, radically reshape the budget for education next year, radically reshape it. I know you've got an election coming up next year, but provide some forward estimates to ensure that there are music specialists in every school in Victoria and attendant equipment and support consistent with all of these recommendations. There are powerful lessons for the government in Victoria that is now armed with a report that contains all the evidence. Thank you.
Could I, on your behalf, thank Brian very much for a very stimulating, challenging address this evening. I think a lot of what he has to say should be taken notice of, not just by politicians, but by press and the community as a whole. Just reflecting briefly, Brian, on your Song Room report in the western suburbs of Sydney, there was a parallel study done, many of you will know, by Herman and Herbert, which was the developmental Kodai project, which was producing similar sort of results. So the evidence is there. We just hope that politicians, not just in Victoria, but federally, will take notice of the sort of things that you're saying. So thank you very much indeed. We've got a presentation for you as well. Thank you. All right, I'd like to hand over to Carl Stevens, who will take us through the next part of the program. Thanks.
Can you all hear me if I don't use the lectern at the moment? So we want now to give you an opportunity to speak, and sorry that you've been waiting so long, but we've really had some excellent presentations from our speakers, and thank you, Brian, for that passionate promotion of a positive response from the Victorian Government to this report. We have a panel of people to answer questions or to respond to any comments that you might like to make, and most of these we've heard from already, and I'd just like to ask them to come and sit up at the chairs here behind me. So Professor Gary McPherson, who welcomed us earlier, your Professor of Music at the Conservatorium of Music here. Thank you to Gary. Professor Brian Colwell, who just spoke to us. Did you want to field any questions? I thought probably there may be some from the more broad context that you gave us. Associate Professor Robert Stevens, of course, whom we've heard from. Mr. Ray Yates, Principal of Monbrook Primary School. Ms. Catherine Lyons, who's the Music Coordinator of Campbell South Primary School. Mr. Kevin Kelly, Executive Director of the Association of Music Educators in Victoria, whom you've met on your way in. And Mr. Carl Williams, the North East Region Victoria Instrumental Music Coordinator for the Department of Education. And, is it one? Now we've got some technology happening here for people who need to might need to speak into it, but I think the room is not too bad. So what we'd like you to do, if you just put your hand up and if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, if you'd like to direct it to any of the panel members or just a general question. If we don't have time to hear everyone's questions, you have a blank pro forma that you picked up on the way in where you could write down a question or comment. There's some prompt questions on that sheet, and if you could leave your name and email, we can get back to you. This would actually be very helpful even if you just want to leave a comment anyway, because the School Music Action Group wants to collect your views about these things, and we can do it not only through your direct comments now, but through your written comments, or if you want to use Twitter, you can use the hashtag that's up there, and we can collect commentary that way as well. So, if we could just, you've also got a list of the recommendations, of course, and perhaps we'd like to open the batting. Appropriate today, since they're on the second test. Gentleman over here, thanks. So we'll start with the lady at the front here, since she's got the mic first. And if you actually could introduce yourself, would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Helen Farrell here from on campus here at the University of Melbourne. Panel, thank you so much for a most interesting collection of thoughts on your work. I would just like to, among other things, share some of my workings, if you like, over the last couple of weeks, being involved, first of all, in music matters, including our principal representative was at that forum, and a most interesting forum that was, that presented a whole lot of interesting data from a number of schools. The other thing I've come from recently is a most excellent forum of collection of music psychologists that we had here last week at a most excellent conference. So the learnings that I've come away with both of those from is that the sort of policy that the sort of inquiry that we've put together is a most incredible bringing together. There's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of challenge to that. And I come from a particularly, with a particular interest in diversity and equity. Professor Brian noted that the recommendations were modest and needed to go further, and I would certainly recommend bring that from a diversity and equity point of view. I have come, for instance, from conferences in Malaysia, China, Taiwan, where I have had the most extraordinary experience of being taken to specialist schools and seen the most extraordinary programs. So I just wondered from the panel if I could have some comments about taking it further for diversity and equity. That we certainly need to collect annual data, and that needs to be collected from those diverse backgrounds, from our Aboriginal, Indigenous Aboriginal backgrounds, special education backgrounds. Professor Gary is very much into those students who have extraordinary gifts, and I think that's part of the diverse. To me, that's the diversity and equity too. One of the themes that we talked about at the conference last week was musical excellence, and we need to do that. So perhaps comment from the panel would be, can we also have lighthouse examples in special education, etc., and in our Indigenous communities, and that whole diverse, and examples of gifted and talented students.
Sorry, Helen, we probably need to contain the comment or question
Sure.
because other people want to have something to say.
How can we include a lot of those recommendations in that? I'm sorry to have thank you.
So I'm not sure if anyone in the panel would want to respond to any of those points. So your key points seem to be about provision for diverse range of students, which was mentioned in the report, students with special needs, students of Indigenous background, in improving music education opportunities. Did anyone want to make a comment on that?
Not only that, look, I have a vested interest in, because we also run a kindergarten as well as a primary school. I believe that we should be focusing on the whole broad range of the child, the whole child. We should never be servants of test scores, and they should not be the measure of success at all. I, like Richard Gill, believe that success for children would be on three factors. One is the ability, the third is the ability to be persistent and to work hard. The second factor in it is having some aptitude for it and having some skills. And the most important one, the third factor, is starting early, because you just never catch up. And I think Richard Gill's book summarises that very well. So when we talk about the whole child as we do at our school, it's really from 3-year-olds right through to 12-year-olds. And I think kindergarten education ought to be encompassed in this sort of report, not just primary schools and secondaries.
Thank you, Ray. That's a very timely reminder, and I think there's more and more evidence about the importance of early years education. Anyone else on the panel had a comment on that?
I guess from an instrumental music perspective, I'd look at recommendation 14, that the Victorian Government develops a set of criteria for Department of Education regions to use when allocating instrumental music program funding. And the report referred to the retaining the local knowledge of the instrumental music coordination allocation system, whereby that criteria may incorporate some sort of level of disadvantage. The people on the ground in the local area do have the knowledge of the special needs of their local schools. So, I see that as all enveloped in that, developing a criteria around instrumental music funding and addressing the needs of individual schools, which currently in the area of instrumental music are only secondary.
Thanks, Carl. And we might move to the gentleman in the red and blue check shirt, I think, who's next.
Good evening, ladies and gents. My name is Darren Weeks, and thank you for the opportunity to address the meeting today. Just in the interest of being brief, I'll define 2 points that I wanted to make around best practice in music education and the role of singing in music education. My own sort of PhD research over 7 years, and with over 400 participants has sort of demonstrated that music education can mean many things to many different people. It seems the USA and the UK have moved forward significantly in defining national standards in music education, and that we still have some work to do in this regard. We've talked today about the benefits of music education, but my experience has been it's not music education, which can be rather nebulous, but it's actually education in musicianship and the process of acquiring those skills that seems to hold the benefit, rather than something that's more nebulous under the topic of musicianship. So I feel that we still have a challenge as a state and as a nation to define those things that we consider to be best practice in music education. And my second point is I'm a little dismayed in the recommendations that although we probably acknowledge the role of singing in music education, it's not explicitly acknowledged here in the recommendations, when we really know now that singing is at the heart of best practice in music education, regardless of whether that's instrumental music or classroom music.
Thank you. Any members of the panel like Gary? Thank you.
Yeah, can I just pick up on that? I mean, if I had two things I wanted to say today, one of them would be that it's okay to talk about these recommendations, and they're great, but a lot of those are about resourcing and the here and now and whether the budget's going to sort of support them. And I think we also need to sort of talk in another way. I think we need a vision for music education in this state for the future. And by that I mean 20 years ago, if you had have asked me in Sydney what were the distinguishing qualities of Victorian music education, or South Australian music education, or Queensland music education, I could tell you the differences. Right now, I would find it really hard because of the blurring and distinction, mainly because of the cutbacks that we've seen in the last 20 years. So I think there was a time when music education in Victoria was very distinctive on the national stage, and people knew what it stood for, and I think there was a more common view of music education. Now, I'm not talking about curriculum, because curriculum is but more of a sense of purpose with the music educators within the state. So I hope that we can have forums and get the best minds in the state together to sort of articulate on paper what we believe and where we want to go and what we feel are the next steps. So it's sort of roadmap, a 10 or 20 year plan. But aligned to that, we need to get and talk to principals. How often do they hear what Brian just said? You know, never. I used to do this run around in the States all the time, and I'd talk to principals, and they'd never heard this before. They'd never even been asked to ask a question about why music is important or arts are important in a school. So I think, in terms of another recommendation, something about allowing us to have a voice to convince others and begin this debate would be very, very important. If we're not going to do that, we're just not going to get anywhere.
I think there is a recommendation about a principal's strategy, promotion strategy, but I think Ray might have a comment on that too.
I'd just like to pick up your comment on singing and to talk about the comprehensive nature of music education just in our school from our practice. One is we do employ a music specialist, but it's not her responsibility only to deliver the program. We require classroom teachers to do what Professor Gary was saying, that each morning they have a session called Do It Daily, where they have 5 or 10 minutes of a program that might be just nursery rhymes, might be singing, and it goes right throughout the school. So you've got to have a whole school approach to it, and not just say it's compartmentalised in just one person.
Okay, thank you. Now, who was next? Sorry, yes, thank you.
Yeah. Stephen Hardy, Director of Music at Blackburn High School. We've got a whole lot of people here. We could probably spend the next hours, probably even days here, all talking about this stuff, and I suspect we probably all find that we're all in absolute agreement about absolutely everything amongst this room. And I'm a little bit concerned that we're going to do all that, and at the end of it, we won't have made any progress forward. Like, we've got this report, we've got the 17 recommendations. I think, broadly speaking, we would all like to see those recommendations implemented, and probably a whole lot more beyond that as well. What can we do now to make that happen?
we certainly have some responses to that one. Robin, did you want to say anything?
The phrase for me comes up again, bipartisanship from political parties. You've got to get both sides of politics on side to ensure this continuity. If you think about the National Review of School Music Education, supported by Brendan Nelson and Rod Kemp, the Howard government, for all its other faults, promoted music education. The change in government, the Music Education Advisory Committee set up by the Howard government was not reappointed, and the whole thing went over towards the numeracy literacy focus. So I think if we can possibly get both sides of politics to recognise the importance of music education, come up with a proper funding model for this, and lock it in as a bipartisan policy. That'd be one way to go.
Then for us as a community, what are we doing that can be picked up and supported by government? What many of us at an expert level are supporting undergraduate teachers, supervising music education people and moving them forward in the profession. Myself, I have actually inducted someone who was just a singing teacher, didn't have any classroom experience, walked through a process to get that man VIT registered, is teaching in a primary school. How can we build models that will emphasise that coaching practice across the state and support one another in building our profession?
Thank you. And just this is really the part of the purpose today, Stephen, wasn't it? Is in fact to get some views about what are the key issues and how we might go forward. And I'm preempting a little bit here, but for the School Music Action Group to coordinate a response to that and to coordinate a lobbying strategy to get some action going. And that's why we're here, really. Yeah, thanks. Gentleman in front. It was the same? Okay, fantastic. Yeah, Ian Harvey, thanks.
So, Carl, if I could just make a couple of very quick points rather than questions. Firstly, unfortunately, there's no costings in the review, and I think, along with the comments that Brian Caldwell was making, that there needs to be costed. So I think we've got the skills within this room to undertake a lot of those costings. I think that there is a need, and I don't think we have time in particular, but I think there's a need to start that lobbying process. We need champions, and I'm hopeful that Jane Kronberg will be a champion for her report in her party room, as her colleagues on the other side of politics need to be champions there. We also recognise that we've got a relatively narrow audience. The key decision makers here are the Premier, Minister Dixon, Minister Hall from the teaching and training side of things, and the opposition spokesman, who I believe is Mr Molino. So I think we need to target those people with a campaign. We need stunts, we need activities, we need events, we need those costings to support it. We have the support of the Herald Sun newspaper. The executive editor Alan Howe is very much on side on this particular issue. His verb, I don't know whether anybody saw the editorial on the 18th of November, but he verbaled the Premier. But the Premier was quoted when in opposition as saying, when elected to government, the Liberal Party will require every student to be taught at least one lesson of music each week. The Liberal Party will also address the growing shortage of music teachers in Victoria. So we have the Premier on record. We've got the very good report from Jan. We've got the views of Brian Caldwell, and hopefully there's more of those from the education sector. We need to act. We need to act relatively quickly. We need to be back in the media not long after Christmas.
Absolutely. Thank you. Did anyone want to make a comment about that, or should we? Well, sorry, I meant on the panel. Right. Agreed. Across the line. Right.
Hello, my name's Sarah Brooke. I'm sorry. Gosh, and I interrupted the very important person. I'm quite nervous because I'm standing in front of a very, very esteemed group of people. Even though I can appreciate this gentleman here from Blackburn High that decisions need to be made and moved quickly, there's something that just hasn't been brought up, and I'm not sure that this is the forum. Although Professor Caldwell says that he would suggest to Mr Nixon that he would like to see music teachers in every school, the reality is that there's just not the teachers around. So at the moment, any kind of implementation of the recommendations, which I support, is going to take some time. And there hasn't been any mention of what I would call the grey army of music volunteers. And I think that there is a possibility where many of us, either retired people or people working part-time, are in a position to do some of these things in the recommendations, like mentor teachers or go and provide workshops for no fee. And perhaps a group like AMUs may be able to have some funding might be able to be sort of put into AMUs to then have coordinate volunteer system to sort of act as a stop measure, in between. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll throw back to the panel again. I think, Brian, you were going to say something about the previous comment?
Yes. I suspect that both federal and state budgets are going to be in dire difficulty in the next year or two. So this is going to require what some people would call organised abandonment. There are some programs that have been currently funded that have had minimal, if not negative impact. They're going to have to be abandoned. The evidence is overwhelming about these programs, as I've outlined. So there'll have to be substitution of some programs and replaced by these, and the case is going to have to be powerfully made. I'll do my best with an opinion article in a few newspapers, and I'm going to argue from the argument of equity that we've got tens, if not hundreds of thousands of students in disadvantaged settings who are currently being ripped off because they don't have access to these programs. That's the argument. In terms of trained specialist teachers, you are absolutely right. It's going to take a while to get up to speed on these. And I'd be interested in the argument, in the evidence, Alison, that you have at the song room about the availability of specialist to professional artists who might be available because the song room is very much reliant, and the success of your program is to make available professional artists to work with regular classroom teachers here. So these are the success of your program draws on these. So the two are going to have to work. And of course the arts industry is one of Australia's biggest industries at the moment and fastest growing industries. So I wouldn't mind a comment from you there on is there some potential here while we train a vast army of specialist music and arts teachers generally?
Thanks, Brian. For those of you who don't know the Song Room, we're a national not-for-profit organisation. We are particularly concerned about those schools that miss out. I hope you can all hear me. So we target the lower CS schools that currently don't have sufficient music and arts specialists in them. We would love it if all schools had sufficient music and arts specialists, but the reality is they don't, and we're not convinced that the time will come where there will be enough specialist music and arts teachers for all schools. What concerns us is those schools that miss out now will be the ones that miss out as the numbers of specialists will continue to miss out as the numbers of specialists increase. So it's those hard to reach pointy end schools. So we're trying to do two things. We try to build the capacity of the generalist teacher in the classroom with our teaching artists that we put in the classroom for a minimum of 6 months. We are talking to universities in Victoria and in fact nationally about them using our Arts Live resource, which is an online resource designed to support specialist and generalist teachers, and how Arts Live could be a resource in pre-service teacher training. And I think they're the two issues, about having enough specialist teachers to go around and about the capacity of the generalist teacher. And I think the Song Room, does a fantastic job of bridging that gap for those schools that are likely to miss out on highly qualified generalist teachers or specialist teachers. And at a cost of $75 per student, $75 per student for one program. So Brian was talking about, we don't necessarily need the billions of dollars being spent. If we could put a teaching artist program in every school in Victoria, every low SES school missing out, it would cost around $2 million a year. And the capacity of those generalist teachers would be improved and the school would be transformed.
Thanks, Alison.
I have two more here. Would that be about enough?
We'll see. We'll need to wrap it up in a minute because we are running behind schedule. And I'm going to suggest, by the way, that we probably don't need the sum up of the issues raised. We just go straight to our conclusions and so on. So now we had some question here. Yes.
Gentleman here, yes.
Hi, my name is Ian Forward. I've been at the coalface for, some people would say, 2 years, teaching music in schools, both as classroom and instrumental. Can I mention that Dr. McPherson, you alluded very strongly to the inequity in schools in Sydney that you had done research on, and also Professor Caldwell, you pointed to the fact of the need for equity. At least I heard many references to the inequity that's happening here. Even in the light of the fact that on a world scale we may be being seen as not inequitable, but if I look at the schools that I have taught in and even the schools that I teach in at the moment, the differences between the haves and the have-nots, at least in terms of what we have in one of my schools and the other, is like chalk and cheese, and it is pretty awful, actually, just in terms of resourcing. I would like to point to the recommendations, which I would agree with you, Dr. Caldwell, Professor Caldwell, that yes, the recommendations there are terrific, and I think all of us would agree that they all should be put forward, but I sort of see them as being the ingredients for the pudding. Only there's no mention in there of what the pudding is, and I do believe that we actually should be making clear recommendation to the policy of what we should be, we feel as a group, hopefully. I don't know how many agree with me, but I do believe that the policy of the need for equality of opportunity of music education for every student is right across Victoria and Australia, of course, but here we're dealing with Victoria. I might point to the situation in Finland when they brought in their comprehensive education system in Finland in the 1970s. The first sentence that was mentioned at the very top of the education policy, not the music education policy, the education policy was equality of opportunity for all in Finland. Equality of opportunity of education for all in Finland. Now that's a politically very difficult one in this country, given the inequalities that we have here. At least I would hope that this group will come up with the possibility of saying to the government, please, what we need, not please, hey, this is what we need. We need equality of education in music education for every student in this country, well, at least in Victoria. And that would equate, I think, agree with what you're talking about, Professor Caldwell, in the fact that we put decent quality services and resources and teachers for music education right across the board. In other words, what I'm saying is, what we've got here, yes, I agree that they're modest, but they're not stating very clearly what the policy should be, which everything should flow from. If we've got that statement there, everything has to flow from it. In Finland, if any school finds that they're not getting equal opportunity, any school right across the board, private or public, and they do have private schools in Finland, only they're not allowed to charge for them. Okay.
So Ian, I'm sorry, but you've had a fairly lengthy question here or comment.
Don't get me going.
And we're going to have to start winding them back now. So Brian, did you have a response?
I said I was at the end of my seat when I read Diane Revich's latest book. I fell off my seat when I look at PISA to find that Australia is classified as high quality, high equity, but remember that's relative among 65 countries. And then I did add my comment in my remarks there that we do know the strategies to improve both the quality and the equity part. And what I was saying really, and that's really the main part of my comments, to improve the equity part, we've got to do something about the delivery of curriculum. And at the centre part of my remarks is the big gap in the curriculum and the delivery of it is in the arts and the music. That is the key theme in my remarks that was underscored by my international scholar partner, Diane Ravitch. I agree with you, absolutely everything you say about Finland. Finland wouldn't countenance the sidelining of the arts. And I've been right through their schools and I know. And of course, Finland's that great example where they will not let a student fall behind by more than 48 hours in anything. They've got folk on the sidelines like pit crews on a racing track who are on call to go and help students who might be struggling a little bit. So these are the known knowns that we're not even touching here in Australia. So we've got a lot of things we can do.
So, but Ian, you make a very good point about the importance of equity as a principle, as well as quality as the other principle that perhaps could be more strongly emphasised in our responses. Now, a couple more. We've got, yes, the lady next to you.
Yep. My name's Tracy, and I'm a third-year teacher. I think when it comes to equality, it needs to be very clear what every school offers in this state. So when we talk about equality, we need to talk that every school will have X amount of resources available, and resources also accounts for time. So every school will offer this amount of time because right now there is a lot of inequality in time. Some schools will offer it a double a week for a semester, a double a week for a year, less than that. Maybe one period a week. So the equality needs to be in the amount of time that it is delivered for, as well as the resources that we offer our students. And that needs to be in low socioeconomic rural schools, middle, upper class areas. Every school in the state should have the same facilities and time given to music to make it truly equitable. And in terms of teaching education, which no one has really, I think, touched upon, there is sadly a big, not emphasis, but kind of an idea that music teaching is what you do when you can't get a job as a musician. And I think that's not everyone's point of view, but there is a strong feeling amongst people going through uni now that you do your Bachelor of Music, you can't get a job, and so you go do a dip ed because at least you can become a teacher, and that needs to change because that's, I think, not the type of attitude. And if that's the attitude of the teachers, I don't think music can be respected in the community if everyone sees it as what you just do because you can't get a job as a musician. I also think the training needs to change. There needs to be more time in actually on practicum, not just learning the theory of music teaching, because we don't see enough of it when we're on our rounds. I think most unis are about 10 weeks of practicum, and you spend maybe the first 2 weeks just getting used to the school. It really needs to be you spend a lot more time in schools and practice teaching before you are given classes on your own when you graduate. And there needs to be a lot more support for graduate teachers. A lot of graduate teachers are in schools on their own, and their first job is they are the sole music teacher in a school, and they're in charge of all the promotion and of music in general. So it's their responsibility to build up a program, and they've got no support, I think, from everyone else.
Thank you, Tracy. I think many people in this room would sympathise with exactly those experiences. They'd know exactly what you're talking about. I'm sorry I can't throw to the panel because we are running short of time. So just one more comment from the lady at the front.
I'll just make a very quick comment. I want to pick up on what Gary said about the report and the role of principals.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
Sorry, I'm Bev McAllister from Dandenong Rangers Music Council, and I'm also on the Music Council of Australia. Gary mentioned the role of principals in the implementation of music education. I'd like to ask, is there a hard copy report on every principal's desk, or do they have the time to go online and read it? Right? No. I was married to a high school principal. He wouldn't have time. Okay. It also should be on the desk of the school council chair so that they know. We've got to have two approaches to this. If we're going to have some action to put forward, we've got to have those two things, and we've got to have what Professor Brian Caldwell said, we've got to have the government approach. I'm excited that he wants to go and see Martin Dixon. That's terrific. Ray Yates and I are in the electorate of the Shadow Minister for Education. We can help at that end, but we've got to have a bottom-up approach, and we've got to have a down.
Absolutely, and side to side.
and I would like to know though whether the principals have a hard copy.
So Jan, you could answer that.
Yes, I would like to answer that question.
Thank you.
First and foremost, the committees actually operate under a structure with a fixed budget. So we have a means to distribute reports to stakeholders and the people who have made submissions. If you get an extra large volume of submissions, as we did during the course of this inquiry, you could almost be blowing the budget. I'm actually going through an issue on the moment with our new reference, which happens to be on homework, and how we reach out to all schools. In recent times, people have become incredibly reliant on the internet to be the means of distribution of information, and largely we've had to leave it up to principals in the 1,300 schools, government schools across the state, to download their own copy. There were about 500 copies of this report printed, and if anybody had a special request, they can come to me and we'd see that they were dispatched. If there had to be a number on file in the Parliament as well, and the coverage includes members of Parliament. And there's a plenty process to use such a report in a physical sense, and so there is a reliance on people initiating the downloading of it, and it's not a difficult exercise to do that.
I understand that, but I also am at the coalface of community music, and I do understand that a lot of principals have no understanding of what a good music program is. They don't even know why there would be. That's a very good recommendation.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank
Sorry,
you.
Bev, we have to wind it up. Gary, did you want to have a quick?
I just want to say, look, I'm a university person. I get praised every year, and I've got performance indicators. And I bet the principals know exactly what they have to do for their annual appraisals or biannual appraisals or however they do it. And I bet your literacy and numeracy are really high on the agenda. And they endow their time, they endow their opportunities and their focus bonus, we probably need a few performance indicators for the arts and in particular music.
So just wrapping up this section, thanks Gary. Thank you. Very good comments. If you've got other comments, I do exhort you to fill in those sheets or tweet. And we're just going to go now to a bit of a wrap up and some comments about next steps. So Robin.
Thanks, Carl. I'll try and make this brief. Next steps. Where do we go from here? There's certainly a proposal that sMAG continues in some shape or form into the future. Whether it changes its name, whether it's slightly reconstituted is something to be decided, not by us, but by interested people, yourselves, hopefully. sMAG will continue, I hope, as an advocacy group which brings together all of the interested stakeholders. Ideally, it would be really good if all professional associations in music education had representation somewhere on a committee or in some format that we're going to have. I think the only other thing I need to mention is that there will be a response formulated from your comments and from the leadership group, as it were, within sMAG, which will go through to you, Jan, I guess. And then there will be a meeting sometime in mid-February. Was that the idea? Yes. When we would look at the whole issue of what sMAG could do, where we can go with all of this as what really has been the major music advocacy group in the state. Carl, have I left out anything?
You want to thank a few people.
Oh yes, I've got to thank some people. I'm not going to leave quite yet. All right. Firstly, thanks, Jan, very much for your efforts and that of your committee. I must say I was very impressed at the hearings, at the level of engagement from the committee. It was really, really excellent. Brian, a very provocative and timely presentation tonight, and I think we can all take some heart from the strength of Brian's convictions here about the value of music in education. And let's hope that sort of movement gets somewhere. It was very good to see Colin here, Colin Brooks. Again, a little bit of bipartisanship would go a long way in some of these matters, I think. Thanks to our panel members and to people behind the scenes in sMAG, and thank you to all of you for coming out on what really wasn't a terribly pleasant evening. Before asking Catherine to just talk about what might happen after the session, there is one very special vote of thanks that I'd like to propose, namely to thank and to recognise our President, Anne Leers, for her outstanding leadership of the School Music Action Group and her outstanding commitment to music education generally. Anne has been one of the absolute stalwarts of music education advocacy in Victoria as well as nationally. Most of you probably know a bit of Anne's background. Certainly her doctoral thesis was a landmark as far as looking into research into music in secondary schools during the mid-90s. This really gave a great impetus for music education advocacy and worked a lot with principals in preparing reports and so on, and I think this had a major impact at the time. Anne has also been involved with a number of music education associations, Music Council of Australia. She was a panel member for the federal government's National Academy, that's right, of Music, and the Australian Youth Orchestra, and then was a critical friend for the National Review of School Music Education 2004-05. It was really through Anne's efforts after the National Music Workshop, following on from the National Review, that the Victorian Music Workshop came into being in 2007, and it was that which led to the formation of the School Music Action Group. Anne has really, as Gary said earlier, been passionate in her advocacy for music education. She has advised the sMAG group that she'll be stepping back from taking a major leadership role in the organisation, And this evening it's my pleasure, Anne, on behalf of all of those present and indeed the wider music education community, to thank you for all of the fine work that you've done in promoting the cause. We would like you to accept a small presentation which is coming down from the back of the room, and I would ask you to all join with me in thanking all very much.
Thank you very much, Robin, for your very, very kind, generous words, and for Gary at the beginning as well. Stepping down from this leadership role is good for everyone. A new face, a new energy, and a new direction, perhaps, is what we need at this point of time. We've been following this direction for how many years?
Something like that.
Yeah, 7 years. And there's such talent in this room. It is fantastic. I would be terribly disappointed if people here today didn't want to come to the meeting we'll have in February. We need you all, we need your support. Nothing will happen without this mass support for what we all want, and that's music education in every school. I would just need to, though, say that you're all wonderful, but I've just been working with the most wonderful people for 7 years who have done as much as I have done, and I do need to thank them most sincerely. And they go right back to the workshop. Some people here were leading groups at the workshop to make responses, and I can see them in the audience. There's a lot here that have worked very, very hard over a period of time. And tonight we've got this amazing group of people as well. And, Robin Stevens has been actually the person that I felt very comfortable with you, sending him everything I write. Would you please look at it and get it back to me so everything's correct? And he's always very anxious to do that and gets it back to me. Having a great editor as a friend is just such a privilege. Thank you, Robin. And of course, we've just got everyone here on the panel. And Catherine, who set up the web page, the blog, and the Facebook. I mean, how could we operate without all the support of all these people? And may I just personally thank you very, very much. And again for Gary for organising this venue at the very last minute. So maybe we'll see where we can get the next venue. But thank you so very, very much for your support tonight and coming. And I think Catherine wants to speak next.
Thank you, Madam. Well, truly indebted to your body of work has been substantial over many years. Thank you, ma'am. Over at Norton's, ladies and gentlemen, there's pizza and beer on offer, so won't you join us and continue the conversation just across the road and down the street? And there, it's on the house, the pizza, so come down and buy a drink and we'll continue the conversation. See you there.